Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our Meet the Author event. It is my pleasure to officially, Kate and I have been chatting for a bit, but to officially welcome Kate. Kate is a native New Englander, as you might have heard, who grew up in Maine and now divides her time between Maine and the UK. Kate is an artist, a playwright, and now a novelist. Superhost has been compared to works by none other than Nick Hornby and Tom Perrotta, so very, very fine company. Welcome, Kate, and thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
So I understand you are going to start us off with a reading from Superhost.
Sure, let's do it. All right, I'm just going to start from the beginning. That way I don't have to sort of tell you what's going on. It's the best way to do it, I think. So, all right. The demons you're stuck with. In the hierarchy of linen stains, blood is at the top. Everyone thinks semen is the worst, but they're wrong. They only think this because of the popular TV show where inspectors take a black light to a hotel room and it lights up neon yellow, indicating bodily fluids all over the bedding. Since that report, people automatically throw off the bedspread in hotel rooms, assuming it's drenched in some stranger's spunk. It probably is. That's why Bennett Driscoll prefers to use a duvet cover in his rentable 4-bed house. Soap, hot water, and a rigorous spin cycle will scrub all the manhood out of a duvet cover. It's the stains you can detect to the naked eye that are the real problem. When Bennett throws back the duvet cover on checkout day, it's the sight of blood he fears most. And there it is, halfway down the fitted sheet. Only a couple drops worth, but on Bennett's bright white sheets, they stand out like a red scarf discarded in snow. Their removal will require bleach and a lot of scrubbing. Recently, he bought a nail brush, or for his purposes, a blood brush, to combat the really stubborn stains. In the beginning, he would just throw the visibly soiled sheets and buy new ones. But now, a year into renting out his suburban London house on Airbed, he has thrown away 5 sets of perfectly good sheets. Bleach is cheaper. He pulls the fitted sheet up from the corners, wadding it into a ball in the center of the bed. If the blood has transferred onto the mattress pad, that's double the work. Damn. Recently, Bennett was awarded the status of superhost on the Airbed website, an honor he earned for having a quick response rate and excellent reviews. Though it's never been his aspiration to become a host, he'd be lying if he said that the little medal next to his picture, didn't fill him with pride. Until 2 years ago, Bennett was a full-time artist who never stuttered over answering the question, "What do you do?" In fact, nobody ever needed to ask him. He was well-known painter Bennett Driscoll. Everyone knew that. Okay, maybe not everyone, but enough people that he didn't have to worry about renting out his house to tourists. Unfortunately, things change. Tastes change. It used to be that anything he painted would sell. In 2002, there was even a waiting list. Now, 16 years later, there are more than 100 of his paintings in storage. His last solo show was in 2013. The critic from The Guardian wrote, "Driscoll cares so little for the current trends in painting that one wonders if he concerns himself with the contemporary art world at all." That pissed Bennett off, mostly because it was true. But a bad review is better than no review. He realizes that now. Since our critics don't review his work anymore, Bennett pores over each Airbed review as though it's the Sunday Times, scouring each for a new and nuanced understanding of his hosting skills. More often than not, they go like this. Bennett was a welcoming and gracious host. Bennett was very helpful. Bennett has a beautiful home. And looking forward to staying at Bennett's house next time we're in London. They're not exactly Times quality, but nevertheless, it's nice to be reviewed favorably. Hey, it's nice to be reviewed full stop. Sometimes he wonders if his ex-wife Eliza ever goes on Airbed to read his reviews. Probably not. She left a year ago to live in America with a hedge fund manager named Jeff. taking with her her steady salary from publishing that, until the divorce, had been paying their bills. That's when Bennett decided to move into the studio at the end of his garden and rent the family home on Airbed. He doesn't think his superhost status would impress Eliza. Almost nothing impressed her. He wishes someone would write, "Bennett has a beautiful home. He was the perfect host. No, perfect man. Exciting, interesting, and handsome in equal measure. He would make an excellent husband. I even bought several of his paintings because I believe they are the pinnacle of contemporary art. No such luck yet."
Thank you so much, Kate. I was chuckling throughout. So if you have questions for Kate, go ahead, keep putting them in that Q&A. I'm going to start off with one of mine. So our main character is Bennett. He's, as you described, this 50-something-year-old recently divorced guy from London. But I would argue that women really are like the heart of this narrative. It's the women in Bennett's life that really propel him to change or reflect sometimes in varying degrees. And there's a bunch of women in the novel. There's 3 women who stay as guests in his house that he's hosting: Alicia, Emma, and Kirsty. Then he has a daughter, Mia, his ex-wife Eliza, and he does eventually meet this woman named Claire. Can you talk a little bit about the women and how they interact and kind of challenge Bennett and his worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, so I didn't know when I first started writing this book that there were going to be all female guests. But I sort of, once I started writing him, I thought, okay, I need something to kind of counterbalance this attempt at writing masculinity, which I was doing. And so obviously, I actually feel like I knew Bennett really well, and I didn't question too much that I was doing anything out of my comfort zone when I was writing him. But I really wanted to be able to explore the female experience, and particularly to explore how the ways in which men and women misunderstand each other. So it made sense at that point to have kind of everybody else in his life, really with the exception of his frenemy Carl, be a woman. So I started that process with his daughter. And I knew that I really wanted that to be a kind of a loving relationship, but also at that point where I think everybody feels with their parents, where it's starting to tip, like who's the more responsible one, who's the one who's parenting who here. So that's, he and his daughter are just sort of coming to that point. And then the guests kind of go from there. So I wanted their ages to reflect. So Alicia, the first guest, is the youngest, and then Emma's a little older, and then Kirsty's a little older. And I sort of wanted them to reflect different stages in a woman's life, and for Bennett to experience how women's ages affect their experience in the world, because these are things, and this is one of the things you realize about Bennett, is he doesn't really he takes things as givens, and he doesn't really tend to analyze things too much until now he's on his own and he's got nothing left to do but analyze.
Right, obsessively sometimes. I see there's a few questions in the chat. I have one from Mary. She says, sounds like you started with character. Was plot secondary to the characters?
Yes, I would say so. I think probably the first thing I started with was a structure. So before I could even really begin, I knew that I wanted to have in chapters that went from host to guest, so that's the structure of the book, is that you start in Bennett's world where I just read, but then the next chapter is told by the guest's point of view. So you're constantly getting to see Bennett's view of the guest, and then in the next chapter you get to see what the guest thinks of Bennett. So that was what I decided first, and then absolutely after that it was all about who they were.
So Bennett, like you, is an artist. He's a painter, and I understand you have an MFA in painting
Mhm.
as well. Bennett was, as you described, once very famous. He was well reviewed, making a pretty good living off of his work, but has since sort of lost his way, artistically speaking,
Yeah.
perhaps. And kind of struggling to like reconnect, to find that inspiration again, or his
Mhm.
artistic path. He's got this cynicism about the art world, or maybe it's just a realism about the capitalist consumerist nature of the art world. Does that reflect your experiences in art?
I think, yeah. I mean, I think I have a kind of, it's a combination of I think a realist and a cynical view of it. And it's really, really hard to be in the art world without having at least some sort of cynical view of it. And there's a few details in the book that are I think people think of them as satire, but actually they aren't. They're realities of the art world, and one of them is that galleries have stopped representing living artists in favor of representing dead ones. And so that's something that happens to Bennett. He gets dropped by his gallery, and they let him know that they would be interested in representing him when he's dead. And these these things happen. And so yeah, it's really hard not to be cynical when this is a world that has realized that you are most valuable when you're dead. And so yeah, I absolutely share a lot of that cynicism because the art world is different from the process of making art, which is something that
Mhm.
Bennett absolutely loves to do. He paints every day. He couldn't stop even if he wanted to. It's that ingrained in him, and I feel that way too. But yeah, it can be. I think things are starting to change now a little bit in the art world. Fingers crossed. But yeah, and there's a shared cynicism of that. And of course his daughter is following in his footsteps, and he's enormously nervous about if this is how the art world treats a relatively well-known white male painter, what's it going to do to his daughter? So that's at the heart of his role as a father as well as an artist.
I actually see two other questions related to art too. Kathleen asks, what came first for you, art or writing? And then another person asks, what's different in the process of writing versus the process of painting?
Sure. I think the technical answer is that painting came first, but it's one of those funny things because I've always been writing, and I think everybody kind of always is, right? I mean, when you're a kid, you're writing stories, people are encouraging that, and certainly in my household, people were encouraging writing stories more than they were encouraging doing paintings. So painting felt to me like I'm going out into the world and really sort of doing my own thing. So that was my chance to sort of say, no, I'm gonna be creative, but I'm gonna do it my way. So when I went to college, I knew that that's what I was going to do. I was going to major in painting, and then that's what I did. I went and got, after that, I went and got my MFA in painting. But when I was at Colby on my BA, I was also the news editor of my college paper. So writing is always been there. They've never been totally divorced from each other. In terms of the process difference, I think that the heart of both for me feels like the same, in terms of you have to be detail oriented in both, and you have to be obsessive in both. You have to be absolutely like, I want to get this right, because in writing you're reading the same sentence over and over and over again, trying to perfect it. And as an artist, you're, for me anyway, I'm painting coat after coat after coat. No, that color's not right. No, do it again. And so if you're not really interested in getting that tiny minutia right, I can imagine it's probably torture. I mean, it's torture when you enjoy it. So I can imagine it's really torture if you don't enjoy it. So I think those are the two. But I love to do both because for me, they kind of speak to each other. I often write dialogue in my head while I'm painting, and then I can go home and sit down on my computer and think, oh yeah, that there's a scene with Bennett when it goes to his daughter's art exhibition, and I pretty much wrote all of that in my head while I was painting, just sort of trying to imagine, um, what it was like when, when my parents would come to my exhibitions and how they try to relate to the work. And I did not paint what she painted. I'll let you read this.
Do you want to like give a little context for folks or?
But there's that kind of that sort of awkwardness of sharing your creativity with your family that
Because that can be so personal. I mean, do you feel like that with your writing too? Like in some ways, it is so vulnerable. When you put something on a canvas or on a page, you're putting yourself out there in such a real, vulnerable, emotional way. And to share it sometimes with the people closest to you is the hardest. It's probably much easier to talk about stuff like that with strangers.
Yeah, I think it can be. And I mean, the one thing that I love about the publishing world that I think is different from the art world is you kind of, when I put on an exhibition in a gallery, I don't get a lot of feedback. I have to kind of, or I get it once the work is on the wall, but I don't, nobody's saying, oh, are you sure that you want to do that? Or have you thought about doing it this way? Like you just kind of put it out there and cross your fingers. Whereas, in publishing, I had people reading the book before I even sold it, and then my agent reads it, and then my editor reads it, and then a couple other people are reading it, and you just sort of like you don't feel like it's all you put it out into the world, and it's like this is ours as opposed to just mine. And that when you're putting something out into the world as largely as you often are with publishing, I really like that feeling of we're all in this together. It suits me better, I think.
It's nice to work as a team in that way. um so the day-to-day details of Bennett's experience, like the couple first pages that you read where he's preparing for and cleaning up after the various guests who have been in his house, are extremely detailed. They're very finely detailed, and they had the ring of truth to me. So I was wondering, have you ever run an Airbnb or worked in any sort of capacity like that? Is that like a dream of yours? You want to open up like a little B&B one day, or?
No, absolutely not. No, no. I was a superhost for a couple of years in a family home that we had. Actually, it was a house that we were trying to sell as a family, and we couldn't sell it, and so we decided, well, let's just try. It was in a location that tourists flock to, so we thought, all right, well, let's give it a try. And
How hard could it be?
exactly. And so I did that, and there were actually, and I wrote a little piece on LitHub about this, because it's actually, it's not as bad as all that. And I think that that's kind of one of the things that if I hadn't done it, this book wouldn't exist, for starters. And I think that kind of work for creative people can be really productive, and it allows you to sort of, you see things in a different light. You see the way people treat your house and how their routines are different from your routines when you're in that space. And so it allowed me to think about exploring how different people use space. But what came with that was sort of knowing all the little ins and outs of the things that Bennett would have to do. Because I did this thing where we could have hired a cleaning service to clean this house. I mean, there's plenty of them out there. And I just got it in my head that I was going to clean this house myself. And it was probably a really stubborn thing to do, but I just thought, I don't want to have to deal with cleaners. I don't want to have to pay them. I don't want to have to schedule them. Right. I'm just going to drive up there and I'm going to do it myself. And, it's an incredible amount of work to clean a house like that, because every next guest wants it to look brand new. So that's Bennett's issue, is that every time he cleans it, and that's why he goes through so many sets of sheets, because the next person isn't going to understand. All they're going to do is see like that tiny bit of brown, and they're just going to say no,
right?
Because they have hotels in their mind, and so, I mean, that's what I would do, is I would weigh it up every set of sheets. Well, what do you do if I can't get the stain out? Do I have to go out and buy new sheets? You're cleaning the refrigerator, and it can't just be like when you clean your refrigerator at home. It has to be spotless. So these are the considerations that you don't think about until you're in the thick of doing it. But I was also aware that there was comedy in this, and I could use it. So
it seems like a perfect job for a writer because you get this like very intimate view of people and their habits and their quirks, and like you say, the way they live and use different spaces. It just seems
Yeah.
like just so much good fodder. There's a question. Rebecca wants to know, how did you get your novel noticed and eventually published?
That is a good question. I mean, I have to say I got insanely lucky in a lot of ways. My agent, it wasn't, I know, because I know people have a horribly difficult time getting agents. And I actually had a relatively easy one. So I think in a lot of ways, my experience is probably, I'm probably absolutely the worst person to ask because I come from a family that's already in the industry. So my father's a writer. My sister owns a bookstore and worked in publishing before she opened her bookstore. So I had a lot of ins. I had a lot of people that I could talk to. Um, so those parts, I suppose, for me were probably a little bit easier. That said, perseverance. It doesn't matter who you are. um, you need a lot of it just to write the book and also to go through and deal with that process of people reading it, giving you criticism, saying this is what you need to change, because all of those things happened for me. Every reader said this is where you're doing it right, and this is where you need the help. So I think seeking out help and meeting as many people in the industry as you can is absolutely the thing to do for anybody who wants to be a writer. Do not be afraid to show your work to people. Get readers. If you know if they don't like the work, they'll help you, and if they do like the work, they'll introduce you to people who can help you even further down the line. So I was lucky that system was already built in for me. But if it's not built in for you, I actually think this is actually a reasonably kind world. There are people out there who want to help you. Absolutely.
And your journey to publishing was delayed because of
Mm,
COVID and everything that's
yeah.
happening, right? So the book, we were talking about this earlier before we went live on the call. It was supposed to come out in June.
Yeah. Yeah, that was, I mean, I'm so glad that it didn't come out in June, because June was a really horrible time in this country, and it was not the moment to be introduced to Bennett. So that is,
I
I'm
think it
I'm
came out at
happy
the
that that's
exact like right time because I got a copy, and it was, this, I think, late this fall, and I was like, I needed something funny and charming and just like, lovely
Mhm.
and fun and interesting. And it was like, okay, I don't, the dark, I tend to gravitate towards very dark narratives and like
Mhm.
psychologically dark things. I was like, I need something that's a little, has some humor to it.
And actually, normally I do too. Like I think I'm a much darker reader than I am writer. Everything my husband's always saying, "Why don't you just read something that'll make you smile?" And I think, I
Right.
know I need to do that. And I do, I do have those books in my stacks. But yeah, this last year, I think I've really wanted to wallow in it. So,
Right, right. So I was struck, and we talked a little bit about how you split your time between Maine and the UK.
mm,
Bennett describes all these different neighborhoods in London where the book
mhm,
takes place. So there's the very like Tony neighborhood where he lives, where he's renting out his very lovely home that he can no
mhm,
longer afford. And then there's this sort of like artsy little location where he hangs out and he drinks and he meets eventually the fabulous Claire.
mhm.
Um, so much character and history and personality, and I was wondering how much of that is a love letter to the neighborhoods and the locations that you frequented and perhaps are missing right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it. I think Love Letter is probably really apt because I wrote most of this book really from here. So I'm in Maine now. So that I think there's always that sort of relationship to when you place something that's not where you currently are. I think there's always a little bit of that level of sort of love for it, where maybe you're not, you know, I could have been harder on London, I suppose, but I didn't feel like it at the time because I missed it. So I think there's that element to it. But yeah, I mean, the neighborhood where Bennett's house is the neighborhood where my husband grew up.
Mm.
So I have a kind of a relationship to that neighborhood that's you know, it's sort of, it's family, but it's his family. It's where he grew up. I've never lived there myself. I've only ever kind of been there for family events and stayed there, you know, for a week here and a week there. But when we're there, when my husband and I are there now, we rent in East London, in the neighborhood where both Bennett's daughter Mia and Claire, the woman he's seeing, live, in an area called Dalston Stoke Newington. So that's kind of, that East End is where I'm sort of more familiar. But then everything kind of culminates sort of in the center in Soho, and that's and I love writing about Soho. It's a wonderful sort of center at the pocket of London. It was seedy for a long time, and it's not seedy anymore, but people want to pretend that it is, but it's not. And so, you know, but Claire's bar, she's a bartender, is right next to you know, or very close to a couple of some of the few strip clubs that still exist in the center of London. And so there's that joke in that scene where she's like, "Why are you in here drawing me when you could be at the strip club?" You know, drawing a number of women who actually want to be looked at by you, and I, you know, and so there's, you know, yeah, but you know, and but I also loved exploring it through the guest's point of view. So these are, you know, these are people who aren't normally in London. So Bennett's a Londoner. He loves it. He's born and bred. He knows his way around. And then, you know, Alicia still very much sees it as a tourist. She's nostalgic from when she went to school there. She did her semester there. So at Emma just doesn't want to be there at all. And so that was kind of fun to write from perspective of somebody who just doesn't want to be there, which has never been my perspective. But it was nonetheless fun to do it. And then yeah, Kirsty, who's British, she's the only British female guest, but she lives out in Devon, which is about 4 hours away from London, and is a very different world. So
Are there any favorite, you know, not that we're going anytime soon, but when we're all able to travel again, are there any like spots that we should definitely hit up in Soho or East London?
yes,
Highly recommend.
absolutely. If yeah, I mean, if you yeah, I've been kind of joking about how I need to do some sort of like pub crawl map for people when this is all
Yes.
done, because everywhere is based on a specific place. So so Claire, in the book, is a bartender at a wine bar called the Claret, which is actually based on a little wine bar in Soho on Dean Street, called the French House. And it is the most wonderful little wine bar that we're all just going to cross our fingers is still there when all this is over, because it's tiny. I mean, there's no social distancing option in this bar at all. And so, but it was frequented by I mentioned Francis Bacon in the scene, and Pager Francis Bacon, and he was there all the time. Peter O'Toole, I think a lot of actors from the 60s. It was a huge part of that kind of intellectual elite of the 60s world. And they have the memorabilia all over the walls. And basically every time I'm in there, I see an actor that I recognize. You know, just, you know, there was a guy from Game of Thrones in there the last time I was in there, just, you know, having a beer, chatting to his friends, and nobody bugged him. And you can kind of get away. It's one of those bars where you can get away with that. And if you did try to talk to anybody, the staff would come up to you and say, "Don't you dare." They're very protective of their regulars. So that would be the first place I would send people.
Okay, house.
Yeah, the French House. And then gosh, yeah, I mean, even the cocktail bar that he takes her to afterwards, is based on a place that's basically right across the street called the Dean Street Townhouse, which is a great kick too if you just want to spend a lot of money on a cocktail. It's really nice, and it does have this kind of like Elk Lodge feel to it. So I mean, Soho's a great place to start when you're going to London, and then yeah, I would start there. Start at the French House and all of the pubs around it. It's wonderful.
That sounds amazing. I'm dreaming of that day when we can do things like go to a really fancy cocktail bar and spend, you know, $13 on a martini or something. Oh, It'd be so nice. Let's see. I have a question. Oh, Mary wants to know where in Maine you are. You're in Portland, right?
I'm in Portland right now. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good place to be. I was saying to Kira earlier that, we're really lucky to be by the water. That's been kind of my reprieve for this last year, is that, I walk 10 minutes and I can see the ocean. So
Mm.
that's what I do when I when I want to get out of the house or possibly scream.
Yes.
So that's I'm very lucky in that regard, this is where I've landed, because uh, there's so much space around us, and I keep thinking, if we were in London, if we were having to do this quarantine in London, I would probably be going crazy, because I need I need that space. I need to be able to get out and breathe and go for a walk, and so I feel very lucky, fortunate that I'm here.
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, something I found so fascinating about the book was really getting this deep dive into the head and heart of a middle-aged heterosexual man and his thoughts on love and sex and marriage and women. I don't know that I read a lot of like male characters in such an intimate way, and I thought it was really refreshing and interesting. And he's complex, and he is very imperfect. He can even get a little creepy with some of the female guests that he's sort of, I don't think he would characterize it as spying on them, but
Mm.
he's spying on them a little bit sometimes. He makes some assumptions and judges them and things like that. And that bears out, I think, too, in his artwork, in the portraiture that he does. But he also struggles in the book. He talks about this struggle to capture sort of the real, like, human aspect of the female subjects that he's portraying. And so I was curious if you could sit down, artist to artist, with
Mhm.
Bennett and offers him some advice, particularly when it comes to his relationships with women, or how he paints them. What would you say to
Yeah.
him?
I think you've posed this. I've answered this question in a lot of different ways, but I like the way that you've posed it, because it's like, what kind of advice would I give him? Because I don't actually know a lot of figure painters, so it would be interesting to see how I would talk to them about it. But I without trying to give too much away about the conclusions that Bennett comes to, because I think he does in some ways kind of figure out what he's doing wrong. But that was kind of, I realized, sort of halfway through writing the book, that one of the biggest questions for him was going to be, why can't I get it right? When I'm painting women, why do they look so blank? Why can't I seem to capture their emotion? What am I doing wrong? And I think one of the things that often happens when you're painting is that you get a kind of, you're only looking through certain, we maybe call rose colored spectacles, or something. You're only looking at things like one way, there's blinkers on. And Bennett needs a new perspective. And um and i and i think that these women that come to his house give it to him in different ways. Um and he even has, at one point, I think he has a kind of an odd idea where he's thinking, well, maybe I can see them, maybe I can paint them through the window. He's trying to come up with all of these sort of scenarios of, like, how can I try to paint a woman realistically? And I think that the answer to that ultimately is that you kind of, when you're asking a woman to sit in front of you in the same pose for 4 hours, you can't very well paint her realistically, can you? Or we're doing what you want to do, because no woman ever sits still for 4 hours. And so that's kind of what he has to realize, is that he might not get what he wants for as long as he's posing them and putting him in a certain position. And Claire asks him at some point, like, aren't these women cold? Like, they're sitting there, like, I wonder if she's cold. And that's never even occurred to him. He's like, what was the temperature in the room? Like, were they really cold? And it's things like, him sort of realizing how little he was almost paying attention to what he's doing. He was on autopilot for painting so many of those portraits, and the critics called him out on it. And so it's about coming back into himself and thinking, all right, well, what is it that I actually want to get out of it? Um, and what do I want them to get out of it? This is an exchange, and he wasn't seeing it as an exchange. So I think that would be the advice that I would give him is, this is a relationship, not, I mean, it isn't, I'm sure it isn't an exchange of money. You pay your models, but still, let's, this is a back and forth.
Right, right. Yeah. And what I love about Bennett, for all his flaws, is like he's open to learning and doing better, and like, figuring a different way of, forging a path in life or love or whatever. And I give him credit.
Yeah. And I don't know that he would necessarily be that way if it weren't for his daughter. And I think that that's why she's such an important character in the book, is that she really does drive along his thinking on so many of these things. And I think she is really, makes him want to be a better man. I'm not sure that he would necessarily feel that he had a reason to change anything in his life if it weren't for wanting to make her proud.
So we talked a little bit about Bennett's obsession, or in your reading, you see Bennett obsessing over the reviews on the Airbed site, and what's it been like to have your book come out and have review, like it's like any review is a good review, but I used to work before this position that I'm in now for Library Journal and School Library Journal. I did a lot of book reviews for a lot of pieces, so I'm very steeped in sort of the mechanism of the publishing, trade reviews kind of world. What's that like to be on the receiving end as a new author? That's got to be like a terrifying, maybe exhilarating experience. I don't know.
It is, and what I've realized is that, and I imagine a lot of writers would say this, that it's almost impossible to get it right, in the sense that there's no scenario, maybe bar like a rave review, that you're going to be happy with. Like even the good reviews, I think to myself, well, why did she use that word? It's kind of like, I'm an obsessive person anyway. So I'm at the point where, and I have been for a while, where I kind of skim things and then ask other people to read them and just tell me to kind of give me the general gist. Because it's a lot like kind of staring into the sun. I can't quite bring myself to like really sit down and take it. But also, at the end of the day, they're not for me. They're to help you decide if you want to read the book. So and in that regard, yes, all reviews are good reviews because you're getting the exposure. So that's what I tell myself.
Have you gotten, I mean, nowadays there's so much direct reader feedback, whether it's social media or whatnot. Like, have you gotten some feedback that you have really enjoyed or have been exciting so far from readers?
I love it when, it's a world in which, people can sort of just send you a message, if you don't like the book, please don't send me a message. But if you do, that those things are lovely to see, that especially when people, what other purpose do we do this than to connect? So I feel like if I've connected with somebody, it's always wonderful to hear that. And I think social media affords that. And I mean, God, I've done it a couple of times. I did an event with Claire Lombardo a couple of weeks ago, the author of Most Fun I've Ever Had. And we struck up a friendship because I sent her a message on Instagram saying how much I loved her book. And that blossomed into us, now communicating and her doing this event with me. So I think if people, they used to write fan mail. I mean, maybe they still do, but now I think it's a great, send a message and I always try to take the time to just say thank you or anything, just because it's so, when people take the time to buy your book and then read it and then want to tell you about it, I don't know. I don't think there's anything better than that kind of connection and commitment. So
that's amazing.
I love that. But in terms of like things like Goodreads, I've not even been on. I can't. No.
I don't recommend it. It's that black hole. It's not great. But you did mention, writing runs in your family. And your dad is acclaimed author Richard Russo. So I imagine you grew up steeped in a very rich literary environment. Do you think that, or how did that influence your path? Like your dad as a writer, did you like talk shop, or did you try to like keep that distance? Like, I don't want to talk to you about this because this is my thing that I'm working on now. Like, how do you negotiate that when you have such a stalwart, figure in your own family?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the beginning. I mean, I mean, from very, very early on, I think that learning from my dad in terms of discipline was such a huge, such a huge part of my creative life, even as a painter. That he made space to write every day, and he did write every day, and it didn't have to be a lot, but he would go out. I mean, he doesn't go out to a coffee shop now because of COVID, but he has a routine and he sticks to it every day, and I saw that. And so, and I knew I wanted to emulate it. I was lucky as a kid that I thought, okay, well, my dad wakes up, he drinks his coffee, and then he goes and he used to write in this little cafe, and he would write by hand, and he would do that for an hour and a half, and then he'd come home, and he was always there to pick me up from school, and then he would, and he would make dinner, and so he had this kind of, I mean, I could see it. He had a life that I wanted to emulate. So from the start, there was that. I had somebody who I could just emulate in terms of what I was doing. But then I spent a lot of time really, really actively trying not to write, because I didn't really want to follow in those very, very large footsteps. So I really concentrated on painting. I would write things and then I would kind of squirrel them away, and tell myself, no, don't do that. Like I was, watching porn or doing drugs or something that you would be embarrassed to tell somebody that you were doing. At least I would be, because I'm like that. So I'd written about 3 chapters of this book before I finally admitted to him what I was doing. And he was wonderful about it. And I said, I'm really sorry, but I was like, I need you to, because I was at this point where I really loved what I was doing and I was having a lot of fun, and it was fulfilling me every day to sit down and write this book. And I just thought to myself, I'm going to be miserable if this is no good, and I'm not, if I'm wasting my time, basically. And I knew, I don't think he would ever have said you're wasting your time, but he's also incredibly honest. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that when he did finally read the full version of this book, it came back with so much pen on it. I mean, he uses green because he thinks that that's nicer than red, but it was absolutely covered in pen. And I needed it. And I needed it. And he treated me with respect and gave me the notes and the criticism that I needed to make it a better book. And I absolutely needed that because my MFA is in painting. It's not in writing. So there were a lot of things that I needed to learn. And he's very patiently taught them to me, is still teaching them to me. So, wow. So I mean, I got incredibly, I wouldn't say to everybody that, you should take your parents' advice when they read your manuscript. But I actually knew that I needed to in this scenario.
Yeah, he's definitely a good exception. I feel like that's sort of like that green pen, like that's his love language, that green pen.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, that's the funny thing about it, is that, like, I know it must have been an incredible amount of work, but I also know how much he enjoys doing it, really. I mean, not even just me, I have to say, I mean, he is probably one of the most dedicated to new debut writers, authors out there. Like he is there for, to help so many debut writers and helping people get their books out there and do, because it is a difficult world to get out there in. So, I mean, I mean, I benefited from it, but so have a lot of writers. He's really incredible in his dedication in that regard.
That's wonderful. Just a reminder, if you have any other questions for Kate, please put them in the Q&A. So we know that Superhost is your debut, but what else is going on? What's next on the horizon for you? Are you working on any other writing projects or artistic artistic projects in the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, I'm doing both. I try. I mean, for a while, I always say I try to do both every day, but recently that is not. Since this book came out, that has absolutely not been the case. I've barely been in my studio painting since this book came out. But I do. Yeah, I've got a lot of work going on in there. Things that I'm hoping might see the light of day in 2022. And that's kind of the same thing for writing. So that was the benefit of this book being postponed by 8 months, was that I got really far into another one. So I'm hoping that that we might not have to wait too long for that one. Who knows? I haven't actually given it to anybody to read yet, but I've been writing it, and I've been writing it every day. So that's been a positive experience for me as well, because I think if I had been at earlier stages of it while I was putting this book out, I think I might have it might have freaked me out a little bit. So it's been nice to sort of like, no, I've got a solid project. I know what I'm doing. It's gonna take it's gonna take a while, but at least I know where I am. So um, I feel like I've been lucky to have that little bit of lead time to really get into sink my teeth into something else.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard that often the second novel can be the hardest. Like you've got this baby, your first debut novel you've been working on, you're cultivating it, it's out in the world. And then I know that for some debut authors, like the next project, the next writing project can be overwhelming. So the fact that you were able to jump in and have the time and space and discipline to really focus on it, I mean, that's incredible, and that's great. We're looking forward to it.
Well, I mean, it's something that I actually, in a lot of ways, Superhost feels like the second novel. This one that I'm working on now is the thing that I've been trying to write for 10 years and just finally had to say I can't write this anymore, and then wrote Superhost, and now trying to return to it with a little more courage than I had before.
That is really exciting. Ooh, I got a good question. What is your writing kryptonite?
Oh,
Oh dear.
um, I sort of feel like maybe my husband could probably answer this question better than I can. I have the kind of, I think it's a Teddy Roosevelt quote that I have above my computer every day that basically says comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that is kind of my kryptonite, is if I'm paying too much attention to what other people are doing, I can't write. So I think in a lot of ways, Instagram is probably my writing kryptonite. If I spend really more than a couple of minutes looking at it in the morning, I'm screwed, because I'm looking at like, oh, well, so and so's doing this, or I could be doing that, or oh, look, she's so much further. And so, I mean, for me, yeah, anytime I'm in a position where I'm comparing myself to someone else, it's almost impossible to write a sentence after that. So just don't do it.
Do it, people. This, I don't know, maybe is related. Rosanna wants to know, do you read other novels while you're writing your own?
Oh, you must. I mean, yeah, I certainly do. Um, I mean, I always say every year that I'm going to read a book a week. It never ends up happening that way. But I certainly try to. And I try not to read anything too closely resembling what I'm doing. So, if I know I'm working on a theme, then I try not to read anything else in that theme, because I get a little bit paranoid that I might steal something. So I don't do that. But I try. So, I was reading, like I was saying to you, I was reading a lot of dark stuff while I was writing this, and then, not to say that Superhost doesn't have some darker elements to it, but I mean, I mean, my favorite author of all time is Shirley Jackson, which you wouldn't know from
Mm.
Superhost, but that kind of, absolutely, no, I try to always have a book on the go, no matter what I'm doing.
Have you read anything lately that you just absolutely loved and would highly recommend?
Well, the book that I absolutely love that I finished last week, I always get the title wrong. I always wanted to say Department, but I think it's Office, the Office of Historical Corrections.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I haven't read this yet. I've been hearing good things.
Danielle Evans, a book of short stories I absolutely loved. It's like a really good album, like an album that you love, where every track, every song is amazing. This book of short stories is that. There's not a dud on it for me that I would throw out. So I absolutely 100% recommend that, especially if you look for story collections. Go out and get that. I loved it. And I'm actually leaving or reading Rumen Alan's Leave the World Behind right now, which I'm having fun with, because again, that's a book. It's a book that I wouldn't have read while I was trying to write this, because they both have the kind of Airbnb theme, and I obviously they couldn't be more different, but
very different in tone, completely.
Well, I think we both have a kind of obsession with, how the guest and the host relate to each other, and so that, yeah. So I'm only like 80 pages into it, so I don't know if I can officially recommend it, but I'm having fun. So.
Okay, I won't spoil it for you, but when you're done, let's chat, because
yes.
we'll talk about it's very strange and very interesting, and just sort of that book did live in my head for quite a while after I finished it. Let's see. Another person asked, did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym?
No, I like my name. No, I think there was, there was like okay, do I really want to be Russo in this world where I don't, it doesn't behoove me to be compared to my father. But no, it's who I am. So I just, that's where I'm most comfortable. And I think if you're going to be in this world, you have to be as comfortable as possible. So no, yeah.
And another attendee asked, did you hide any secrets in your novel that only a few people may find?
I mean, there are definitely references to things that only a few people in my life would know about. But I think that that's true of pretty much any writer. Is there are certain autobiographical details that only are autobiographical, and there's really only a couple people in your world would also know that they're autobiographical. So yeah, they're in there because you have to use your own experience, but the fun is at guessing, I suppose, what's real and what's not.
Love it. I was just noticing in the chat that there's some good news. The French house is still open. So
hopefully, I mean, I think the pubs in London are supposed to open again like middle of April. So hang in there, French house. You'll be all right.
We want to come visit you. Yeah. Well, if there are no other questions for our super guest this evening, I actually have one final question. If people want to see some of your fine art that you do, where can they find it to view it and see some of your work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the easiest place at the moment during pandemic is katerusso.com. So I think if you go on there right now, the first thing you're going to see is my Superhost book tour. But if you go on the side, it says there's one that says author and there's one that says artist. If you click on the artist, you can see a whole, I break it down between paintings, drawings, the various things that I do. So you can just click on them and have a look around. But no, it's been nice. I think a lot more people have been. I can see from my web hits when I look at the page that there has been, people who've come on for the book have gone and looked at the work, and it's great because it's a different world, and I feel lucky to be having a conversation in both.
Do you think there's ever a possibility that those worlds would collide, like in illustrating or like in a more like intentional way for you, or no, those are two different spheres?
Really. I mean, yeah, a couple of times I've sort of been asked, would you write a children's book? Because that seems like maybe the kind of the most likely. But no, I think I mean at this point in time, I think my sense of humor is far too dirty for that. So nobody would buy that children's book, but maybe someday I'll tone it down and it'll be all right.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. I really enjoyed your book. It was absolutely delightful. I love the characters. It was just exactly the breath of fresh air that everyone needs right now in their life. So if people want to see, I know you're on this virtual tour, so where are you headed virtually next in the world?
Virtually next. That is, where am I headed? I'm headed to Belmont Books next Thursday night. They're just sort of just outside of Boston. So that will be fun. I'm talking to Petra Meyer from NPR. Nice. So that should be really fun. And I am doing Adriana Inc. which is like a Facebook Live thing. I'll be posting about it on Instagram. It is on Tuesday, I think. So those are the next 2 things coming up. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, exciting. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. I've had fun.
Best of luck with all of the virtual tour. And just a reminder, for all of our attendees, you can of course put a hold on the book at Darien Library, but if you would like to buy it, we really encourage you to visit our friends and co-sponsors at Barrett Bookstore, where you can get Kate's book and many other amazing books and staff recommendations at barrettbookstore.com, or go visit them if you're a Darienite around the corner. Thank you everyone for hanging out with us this evening, and we'll see you again very soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.